Welcome to today's broadcast of In Conversation with Dr. Sherry Cooper. We'll be exploring the world of mortgages in Canada and why it's important to have a deep understanding of this topic. To guide us through this conversation, we're joined by Dr. Sherry Cooper. Dr. Cooper is a renowned economist, financial expert, and best-selling author with over 30 years of experience in the industry. She's also the chief economist at Dominion Lending Centres, Canada's largest mortgage company. In this episode, Dr. Cooper will provide us with valuable insights and expert analysis on the current state of the Canadian housing market, the impact of interest rates on mortgages, and the importance of working with a trusted mortgage advisor. We'll also delve into the services offered by Dominion Lending Centres and why they're an invaluable resource for anyone looking to purchase a home or invest in real estate in Canada. So whether you're a first-time home buyer, a seasoned investor, or simply interested in the world of finance, this broadcast is sure to provide you with valuable information and insights that you won't want to miss. So sit back, relax, and join us as we dive into the fascinating world of mortgages with Dr. Sherry Cooper and your host, the president of Dominion Lending Centres, Eddy Cocciollo.
You know, it was about 5 years ago around this time, you're hearing about this COVID-19 and flattening this curve. And, you know, the world sort of became a little upside down. I can't believe that was 5 years ago. And now we're dealing with something south of the border that has become really a challenge. And that is the T word that we're hearing more and more, and that's tariffs. And it has wreaked havoc a little bit, and it continues to be frontline news. We're going to talk lots about that this morning. Sherry Cooper, I think you're 16 out of 17 now on guessing about a quarter point discount. It was already priced into the markets, and we saw it happen this morning. Lots to talk about. Please welcome our chief economist, Dr. Sherry Cooper. Sherry, you know, you and I talked a little bit about what's going on, but we all agree it's a little nuts, isn't it?
It's more than a little nuts. I mean, it is truly beyond anything I could have imagined how the U.S. is inserting disruption and disorder into the global trading system. And I think this is only his 7th week for Trump in office. So it's too bad because it isn't going to do what he thinks it's going to do.
Well, it's all about fentanyl, right? It has nothing to do with money. It's all fentanyl. Yeah, I mean, strange times. I was looking at the announcement for the quarter point, and they talked about, you know, the economy grew quite big, 2.6% in the fourth quarter.
Right.
Fourth quarter, right. And then, you know, obviously the decrease was more about what's coming than what's happened. So we'll talk a lot about that. Just a reminder, folks, if you have questions, put it into the chat. We'll get to them. We're going to allow Sherry to go through her slides in its entirety, and then we'll get to the questions. I know there's lots to talk about. We'll probably go over the hour today, which is okay, because there's just so many questions I know that we're going to get. I think we're going to have a pretty big audience today, Sherry. So hope you're ready, and I'll hand it over to you, and we'll get to those questions as soon as possible. Over to you, Sherry.
Thank you. Well, I don't have to tell you what the headline is. The Bank of Canada did cut the overnight rate 25 basis points, taking it down to 2.7%, 2.75. But let's first talk about where we are right now. We are under the dark cloud of tariffs, and this, I'm going to call this modern mercantilism. What is mercantilism? It was a model of the global economy prevalent during the roughly 16th to the 18th century. Countries believed that having a trade deficit was a negative thing. And that, in fact, you would be richer if you could produce and consume everything domestically. Now, that theory seems to be stuck in Donald Trump's head for some reason. Because what we learned during the period that he loves to hearken toward, which is the McKinley era at the end of the 1800s, McKinley did introduce major tariffs, and those major tariffs end up causing a panic, global recession, a bit of inflation, and by the late 1700s, Adam Smith, in his seminal work, talked about what was wrong with the mercantilist concept. In mercantilism, the belief was that you're better off to be completely independent, producing and consuming everything domestically, because the assumption was the global economy was a fixed size, and therefore it's a zero-sum game. If one country is prospering, then another country must be failing. And that's the mindset that Trump has, that if Canada, for example, is enjoying the benefits of exports to the United States, the belief in Trump's mind is that the US would be better off if it could produce all the cars, all the oil, all the steel, all the aluminum, all the food by itself, and therefore not trade with the rest of the world. In fact, what the US would like to see is exporting everywhere without importing from anywhere, which of course is not possible. Now, what the trade war does is it increases prices, but it also snuffs out growth. And as a result, we will be worse off at the end of the day than where we started. So let's talk about that. Trump came into power just 7 weeks ago and has wreaked havoc on everything. I mean, the chaos is enormous, and purposefully, he's flooding the zone, as he says, with activity. You know, whether it's putting tariffs on, taking tariffs off, it's a constant stream of dramatic actions. So what he's doing is, in preparation for tax cuts, he believes that he can pay for the extension of the 2017 tax cuts, which are due to expire. He believes that through revenues that he collects as tariffs, that's how he will pay for that tax cut, which is certainly not going to happen, because tariffs reduce overall economic activity. And businesses have already responded. Businesses are so nervous about the outlook that they are postponing hiring. They've postponed investments in equipment and technology. And consumers also are nervous about their incomes, nervous about what the stock market is doing, and concerned what the future will be like. In the meantime, we've got Doge and Elon Musk going through and slicing with a hatchet employment in the federal government and shutting down all sorts of spending programs. So that's deregulation. They've talked about immigration policy, but I call it deportation policy, because they aren't doing a thing to encourage immigration, quite the opposite. And there's still a question mark about whether or not Donald Trump will accommodate an independent monetary policy by the Federal Reserve. That shoe hasn't dropped yet. I'm looking back on recent history. In 2019, we did have tariffs, and it was the full year of tariffs. The U.S. over that full year lost 43,000 factory jobs. Industrial production contracted. Business investment stalled. Median household incomes fell for the first time in 5 years. And the hit to consumer earnings was $8 billion. Now, this obviously was not what was intended. Fed officials revised down 2019 forecasts as the tariffs were implemented. And that's exactly what's happening now. It was a big mistake, but it's one that is repeated this time now. Canada is the U.S.'s second largest trading partner, and this is very important. We, Canada, are the #1 export market for American goods and services. So driving our economy into a recession is, in fact, hurting our spending on American goods and services, by definition. So this isn't going to pay off for anyone. Canada has the second lowest trade deficit in goods and services with the United States. And if you take our oil exports out of the trade balance, excluding energy exports to the U.S. has a trade surplus with Canada. We have a huge travel surplus with the United States. The U.S. in fact has $15 billion more in travel dollars, vacation dollars of Canadians than Canada does with Americans. It's a net trade surplus for the U.S. In addition, the U.S. is the least dependent country among the G20 on trade, on exports. This chart is really interesting. Pay attention to those light blue bars. The dark blue bars for, let's use Canada as an example. Canada has the second largest exports as a percent of its own GDP. Over 20% of our economy are exports to the United States. And then that very light blue bar is U.S. exports to Canada as a percent of U.S. GDP. And there you see it's a tiny, tiny fraction. The U.S. is not a major exporting nation because the U.S. is a voracious spender. It's the richest country in the world. It has 300 million plus people with relatively high incomes, where consumerism is a fact of life. And therefore, the rest of the world enjoys the largesse of Americans by shipping whatever it is that they produce that Americans want. So, no question, Mexico and Canada are going to be most dramatically impacted because we are so important to U.S. trade. Now, Trump has said that the U.S. is losing $200 billion a year to Canada and characterized that figure as a subsidy. Now, I don't know where he pulled that out of a hat because I don't see 200 billion anywhere. A trade deficit is not a subsidy. We are giving the United States our oil, our autos, or whatever products we're producing in exchange for US dollars. So Canada makes 10% of all American cars, and yet we consume a huge volume of American cars. So generally, if you exclude oil, we actually buy more from the United States than it buys from us. So the basic premise of these tariffs don't make any sense. In addition to that, effective today, there's a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. Now, Canada is the largest exporter of steel and aluminum to the US by far. And you can see from this chart just how dramatic it is, and particularly for aluminum. That's in Quebec, and $9.5 billion of exports to the US from Canada, compared to the second largest at only 1.1 billion. So this is going to be very negative for Quebec's economy, very negative for the Canadian economy as a whole. Now, steel and aluminum go into so many products, so rising prices there filter through the economy. Our number one export to the US is oil, and the US purchases our oil at the Canadian domestic price, which is an advantage. It's lower than West Texas Intermediate. And in fact, the US would not be such a large net exporter of oil if it weren't for Canada. Canada has a competitive advantage in oil, both because the oil available within Canada, but also the inexpensive hydroelectricity, which is why aluminum, in fact, is a product that Canada has a competitive advantage relative to the US. Now, the auto sector is very much a continental North America sector. They may be US auto companies, mostly they are US auto companies, but those American cars are produced in Canada, Mexico, and in the United States. In fact, a single car in its initial, making all the auto parts and then putting them together goes back and forth between the three countries, and often 6 or 7 times. The whole idea of the free trade agreement between Canada, US, and Mexico was to maximize the profitability of the automobile sector, to minimize the excessive costs. And it's been extremely successful. Yes, yet this is something that Trump wants to change. If he were to fully onshore all of non-US auto production, it would require a 75% boost in US production and a $50 billion increase in new factories. This would significantly decrease the profitability of US auto companies, and it would take years to put in place. So ultimately, in my view, we should be renegotiating the USMCA, the free trade agreement, move it up to this year. It's scheduled for next year, rather than having tariffs foisted upon us. You can see from this chart that NAFTA and the more recent trade agreement, which was in fact a Trump trade agreement, he negotiated it, has benefited the US more than it benefits Canada and Mexico. And one good way of looking at that is, you can see this is the stock market. Corporate USA has far outperformed Canada and Mexico in the past 30 years, when we've had a NAFTA agreement or USMCA agreement in the auto sector. It goes back even further than that with the US-Canadian Auto Pact. Now, we do have room for retaliation, however. The U.S. exports to Canada and Mexico are almost triple American exports to China. So this gives Canada and Mexico the power to retaliate, but it also means that they're biting the hands that feed them, because they're causing the very people that buy American exports in Canada to have less money, to be less willing to buy, to be more nervous about the outlook, and potentially to lose a job. Most exports to the U.S. are from U.S. companies that produce outside the country. And tariffs could reduce U.S. corporate profitability. Will definitely reduce U.S. corporate profitability over the near term. And I don't see how that is likely to change, because it's not possible to reshore all the products that are produced outside the U.S. that are consumed inside the U.S. Another big part of what Trump is doing is he wants the U.S. to be the #1 oil producer in the world. Now, the U.S. has increased its oil production as a direct result of Canadian exports of oil, our #1 export to the U.S., oil and gas, energy products. We're #1 provider to the United States. Our oil sands, heavy oil, is refined in the United States. Now, Trump likes to say, drill, baby, drill. He likes that policy, but it's profitable for the oil companies only if oil prices average about $78 a barrel. Right now, oil's at $67.50. And oil prices over the last several weeks have fallen because, of course, oil demand decreases when economic activity slows. The U.S. has plenty of oil. The real emergency is the lack of power generation. China is already at peak oil demand, arguing that prices will trend downward. OPEC Plus is increasing supply, which puts downward pressure on oil prices. And tariffs slow economic activity and weaken oil demand, and therefore oil prices. Now, the energy and automotive sectors are key because there are no alternative sources that can meet U.S. demand. They cannot, in fact, find some other place that can produce what they need. And certainly they don't have the capability domestically to produce all that they need over the short term. It would take years, literally years, and a whole lot of expensive activity to build the capability. Now, primary metals, including aluminum, as well as food and beverage manufacturing, chemicals, machinery, aerospace, are sectors most likely to be vulnerable to potential tariffs. Canada also exports strategic materials to the U.S., such as uranium ore, zinc, tellurium, nickel. The U.S. buys 50 to 80% of critical minerals from Canada. The U.S. does not have a source of these minerals domestically. It's the perfect example of why it is important to trade with the rest of the world. It also tells you why Donald Trump is so interested in signing a deal with Zelensky, a deal that would give the U.S. access to the rare earth minerals and other minerals in Ukraine. And finally, that is a very important lever we have, because the US absolutely can't replace what we provide. And as I mentioned earlier, Canadian tourism to the US yields a surplus of $15 billion. So the last time I showed you this chart, it said soft landing, not hard landing, but that was way back in January 29th, when we were just recently hearing about tariffs. Now, if these tariffs and new ones coming are sustained, we will see a recession, and it will be a hard landing. This, of course, is increasing, all this tariff talk is increasing the cost of everyday goods for both Canadians and Americans. It truly doesn't make sense. Now, it's any economic forecast today is a guesstimate, because none of us know how long the tariffs will be in place or exactly which tariffs and how high they will be. It's just, it's a very uncertain time. But what I've done here is, assuming the tariffs remain for 1 year, we will see minus 3% growth in the second quarter of this year, like the current quarter. This is going to be ugly. And we'll see negative growth in the third quarter. You see that in the first quarter, the numbers are down from where they were. Sorry, I'm going to go back. In the first quarter, the growth plunged from 2.6 to 1.5%. I got minus 4% for the current quarter, and minus 0.8% for the third quarter, and then much more moderate growth thereafter. Again, totally unnecessary, self-induced by the United States. You can see here that Canada's growth pace has been very different than the US. Canada's GDP per capita has fallen for the 5th consecutive quarter. There's a stunning divergence between the US and Canada, which is unprecedented in modern history. Never before has our economy underperformed the US so dramatically. Never before have our interest rates been so much below US interest rates. Never before, in fact, has our currency fallen so much, not just with respect to the US dollar, but with respect to other global currencies. You can also see that Canada's labor market deterioration is much more pronounced. Our unemployment rate is 6.6% in February, according to the latest data. The US figure for the latest data is 4.1%, which doesn't, I mean, that more than is reflected in just different measurements and different components. Now, this so shows you just how interesting. You can see mortgage payments relative to after-tax income much, much higher in Canada than in the US, where you can lock in a 30-year rate on your mortgage. And therefore, the US homeowner, it does not have to worry about renewals. Renewals, of course, are huge this year and next. So we have already seen job growth stall in Canada as the direct result of this nervousness about tariffs. The actual job growth was much weaker than expected in February. It was pretty flat. Just 1,100 new jobs created. The unemployment rate remained unchanged at 6.6%. Wage inflation is coming down 3.8%. Now, the latest data for inflation or January, inflation for Canada comes out next week, but the latest inflation headline was 1.9% in January. The Bank of Canada made a big point today saying that they can respond to weakness in the economy because inflation is so close to 2%. So, and the Bank of Canada also stated several times that monetary policy cannot reduce the effects of a trade war. The thing with trade wars are it leads to inflation and recession. And so, monetary policy can only do one thing at a time. But my belief is that for Canada, the impact on the economy will be far greater than the uptick in prices, and that in fact, many of the price increases will not stick, will not be sustained, because consumer spending and business spending will decline by so much. Now, our inflation, the core inflation measures did edge up in January. And we've seen that looking at the 3-month moving average of these core inflation measures, inflation is approaching 2%-ish. But I do think that Bank of Canada will be careful to look through temporary increases in prices. And this shows you the preferred inflation measures by the Bank of Canada, pretty flat at around just under, well, call it 3% or less, depending on the measure. So this is the 7th consecutive rate cut by the Bank of Canada. In the most recent couple of weeks, it was highly expected that the Bank of Canada would cut rates. But prior to the tariff tremors, there were some who thought that the Bank of Canada was finished with easing. I think we're far from it. Monetary policy actually remains restrictive. The overnight interest rate is still 85 basis points above headline inflation. The average, which is called the real rate of the real overnight rate, the average real rate of the past 30 years is only 60 basis points. And overnight rate is likely headed for 2.25%, maybe even 2% by the spring of 2025. Now, this shows you that with the overnight rate coming down, tomorrow we'll see prime rate come down to 4.95%, which of course that's a positive, but in some respects it will be offset by just everyone's concern regarding what's happening. A prime rate, though, at 4.95% means lower mortgage rates, lower variable mortgage rates, but lower rates in general as fixed rate mortgages have come down as well. And Canadian and U.S. central bank policies have never diverged by so much. Right now, the overnight spread between the Canadian overnight rate and the federal funds rate in the U.S. is about 190 basis points. Our overnight rate is 190 basis points lower than the U.S. This is a record gap driving the Canadian dollar down further. This is the 5-year yield. Yesterday, it was at 2.59. Today, it's at 2.70. But you can see that it has definitely come down since the inauguration and all of the disturbance and disorder in the global economy. These are the decision dates for 2025. As you see here, I'm predicting that we get another 25 basis point rate cut in April and and one June 4th when they meet again. If I'm wrong, maybe one of these cuts will be skipped. That would be if inflation were to come up considerably and the economy appeared to be stabilizing. But I think this is going to have such a negative impact on the economy that we'll actually see the Bank of Canada taking rates down quickly. This will be good news for home sales. Remember, a lot of the people that are laid off, a lot of the people that are most affected by the tariffs are not potential home buyers. And low interest rates are going to make a big difference in the housing market. Nevertheless, that's not to suggest that it's all smooth sailing. Right now, Canadian home sales have slowed sharply and new listings are surging. So the sales to new listings ratio has moved down. The inventory of unsold homes has moved up. This shows you January home sales. Late this week, we'll see the February numbers. But January home sales fell 3.3% month over month. This looks at the seasonal pattern. You can see that January is the weakest, December, January are the weakest months for home sales, and the strongest is May, and it's straight up from here. So I'm suggesting that with any luck at all, we will see this kind of pickup in home sales as we move into the all-important spring selling season. So looking at sales activity, you can see that it came down in January. And new listings have surged. Big increase as sellers finally decided that they want to get out of their homes as quickly as they can. New listings up 11%. Sales to new listings, of course, have slowed. And the inventory, the months of inventory available for purchase has picked up. Looking at home prices, national home prices are little changed in January and have been little changed for quite a long time. Now, based on the preliminary February data, this shows you that we've seen home sales plunging pretty much everywhere except Montreal. Home sales down Vancouver, Fraser Valley, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, and the yellow bars show new listings. New listings continue positive. So again, lots of inventory. It's getting close to a buyer's market. We've seen enormous renewals this year, payment shocks, refinancing. Half of Canadian mortgage are coming up for renewal in the next 2 years. The good news is that people have been stress tested based on higher interest rates than the actual contract rate. So though the monthly payments are going up for most people who have refinanced, in fact, the incomes have risen by substantially more, and most people can carry the extra burden. That's, of course, as long as they have employment and as long as we don't go into a very deep, dark recession. So we're back to the question, as always, of fixed versus variable mortgages. One would think that variable would be looking more and more attractive. 50% of new mortgage borrowing is in the 3 to 4 year fixed rate loans. 23% are fixed, less than 3 years. So 10% are fixed, 5 years or more, and we see variable rate mortgages picking up. But all the uncertainty out there, I think that there certainly will be some buyers that want to lock in a rate, at least for a little while, until things become clearer. Another big negative for the Canadian economy from a secular point of view is the dramatic slowdown in population growth. When the federal government realized that the housing shortage was the direct result of immigration, they announced that they were going to reduce immigration, and boy, have they ever. This looks at planned permanent immigration. It was 485,000 in 2024, expected around 395,000 this year. But much larger than this are temporary residents, much larger than planned permanent residents. Temporary entrants are either foreign students or temporary workers. And there were 800,000 of them in 2023 compared to 425,000 net new planned permanent immigrants. And what has happened with temporary, just looking at the foreign student component, what they told us initially was that they were aiming for 364,000. And instead, foreign student permits plunged 45% to 280,000 in 2024, just because of the dramatic changes in the second half. So down 650,000 foreign student permits were issued compared to 2023. So this too will put downward pressure on spending and prices. So the population growth has already slowed. At 1.7%, the population growth is at its lowest level in 2.5 years. And this is forecasting, looking at the forecast going forward, immigration cuts to slash Canada's population growth in 2025 and 2026. Now, this is good news on the inflation side, but it also means slower economic activity, all other things equal. So it's compounding the effect of the tariffs. And I do think that because this in itself has a dampening effect on price pressures, it's another reason why the Bank of Canada will take interest rates down more than what was originally expected, and that we will see lower for longer interest rates going forward. Thank you. Thanks, Eddie.
That's thank you, Sherry. Obviously, lots of information there. We want to unpack some of it. We have tons of questions. Just before we get to the questions, I just want to address all those that are coming up for renewal, maybe looking to get into the market, maybe looking for a refinance, maybe want to take advantage of the markets coming down and get some capital into the markets. There is a lot of questions around, should I go long-term, short-term? I may be at a higher rate that I took in 22, 23, that can I get out of? We can help you. Contact one of our mortgage professionals. You can do that through our website, dominionlending.ca. We can walk you through refinance and renewal calculations. We have the ability to use some of our applications and technology to ensure that it is the right thing to do. So please contact one of our professionals and we can go through all of that with you. There are solutions. Don't feel like you're overwhelmed and you need that, extra advice. We can provide that to you. Give us a call and we'll help you do that. Sherry, there's a lot here to talk about. I want to first address the fact that you talked about in 2017, there was tax cuts and Trump is looking to pay for those. And he's using tariffs as a source of revenue to offset that. That's one thing that I don't think is talked about a lot. So you're saying that he's looking at this and going, hey, I want to do further tax cuts. And how am I going to do this? Well, I can just add tariffs, which will, in his mind, add billions, maybe trillions of dollars to offset that. And you're saying, well, that's not possible. You gave some examples of past tariffs that really didn't, gain that momentum of revenue that he thought it was. So That's strange. And if that doesn't happen, is he still going to do it? Yeah.
Right, Eddie, he's put his people around him. And the only thing these people all have in common is that they worship Donald Trump, and they won't ever tell him he's wrong about anything. Plus, he's handpicked economists, and it's not easy to find economists that are in favor of tariffs. So he managed to find one or two. And so what's scary is that he's not going to hear anything even remotely resembling what I have just talked about.
Right.
And who knows how this all will play out, because he never admits he's wrong. And that suggests that he'll keep tariffs on a lot longer than makes sense. And on top of that, of all the countries in the world, Canada, I think, Mexico as well, are just so vulnerable.
So just before I forget, I want to thank our sponsor, FCT. Thank you, FCT. You continue on being a great partner, and we can always use your services when it comes to real estate closings. So the other question I have, you said 20% of our economy is exports to the U.S. How much?
Yeah.
Okay, so how much of the exports that we're doing are going to be affected by tariffs? How much will that take down that 20%? Will it be substantial? Will it be, hey, you know what? At the end of the day, the U.S. needs to consume steel. They need to consume all these things. They're going to be willing to still export and pay the tariffs. It might be a small amount. Like, is it going to be half that 20%, a quarter of it, 3/4 of it? What are your thoughts?
Well, we'll find out. It isn't going to be a dramatic decline, because the U.S. has to get aluminum somewhere.
Right.
They can't produce it all themselves.
Yeah.
At least not now.
Yeah, and I would imagine, Sherry, that over time, it'll take time before really there's a dramatic effect from these. Because if you look at, you can't open a steel factory and, I'll open a steel factory in a month and we'll get it going. Don't worry about it. No, it's not going to happen. But what will happen is the tariffs will be passed down eventually to the consumer. So that car or that appliance or whatever is made out of that steel or aluminum will go up in price, which will affect inflation. Okay.
And think about housing construction becomes far more expensive.
Right. You have aluminum or the soffits, you have obviously steel beams, you have like all of that metal in the wires. Yeah, I get it. So there will be effects of those home costs. Okay, so let's get to the questions. By the way, Sherry and I agreed we're going to be here past the hour. We know how important it is to get this information. So if you want to stick around, we're going to stick around. So our first question comes from Greg Baxter. Hey, Greg, hope you're doing well. Why are so few people speaking about the trade war with China?
Well, it's interesting. China on March 20th says they're going to impose 100% retaliatory tariffs on Canada or on our canola oil, while pork and seafood will face a 25% levy. The tariffs are pushback against Canada for imposing 100% levy on electric cars from China and 25% on steel and aluminum. So that's coming March 20th. It isn't just the United States that's attacking us. China is as well, although they're responding to something we did. But it's really the U.S., Mexico, Canada, and China that are in this trade war. Now, Europe does export a bit of aluminum and steel to the U.S. The tariffs are on them now for their aluminum and steel, and they've retaliated with tariffs on the United States. But they don't have anywhere near the exposure that we do.
Okay. So Rod Reese asked, how will the 100% tariffs imposed on Canada by China impact us? So you talked a little bit about that.
Basically it doubles the price of a Chinese electric car. I'm sure they were cheaper than they are here.
Right.
In general, and what it's trying to do is make the price a little bit closer to where our own cars are. But it's funny because I haven't seen any Chinese electric cars roaming around, and I've been in Florida for months now.
Yeah,
it's not a big factor, but it certainly is part and parcel of what we're confronting.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that we send that much seafood to China, but I guess, seafood, probably tuna, things that lobsters, I'm not even sure, but okay.
Yeah,
and then canola oil, I get.
2 billion people,
Yeah, right. That's right. Yeah, they'll need as many exports. Exactly. Okay. Sean Humphreys asks, hey, Sean, hope you're doing well. Trump was elected on promises making life more affordable, yet these policies seem to favor corporate profits over wage growth and worker well-being. What are the consequences of this trend? What could reverse it? Like, that's a great question. Is there something that could reverse that?
Trump's always been much more concerned about the stock market than about individual financial health. And they used to call it the Trump put, meaning that you could always count on Trump doing something to revive the stock market in his first term. He paid so much attention to the stock market that there was automatically a Trump put, meaning a put as versus call in the options market, meaning somebody will be there to provide demand in the event of a weak stock market. Mm-hmm. And thus far, Trump seems to be letting the stock market find its own way, and it certainly hasn't been pretty.
No, it has not. Definitely looking at I'm trying to avoid to look at my portfolio, to be honest. I'm sure you are too, Sherry. Yeah. Okay. Sean Smith. Hey, Sean. Sherry, is it possible that tariffs are being used to renegotiate our trade deals? I have a few.
Absolutely. And that's why I want them to just renegotiate. Start now. Get rid of the tariffs. Start renegotiating now.
Yeah. But it's hard.
You see, Trump thinks that this is going to put us and Mexico in a very, favorable negotiating position for the United States. Like, we'll be so beat up from all these tariffs that we'll agree to anything.
Well, it's hard to renegotiate anything when you don't even have a government. Like, we're in,
right.
It's so strange to see that we're in a crisis, and yet there you go. Thank you. There is another, hey, Rob, again. So do you think that the fact that Canada does not currently have a federal leader, well, we kind of do, and a parliament being prorogued for 2.5 months puts Canada in a weak position? I think it does. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, of course it does.
Yeah.
Of course it does. We don't even know who's going to be prime minister. I mean, we know one among two. So, but I mean, and it's obviously already had an effect on our politics.
Yeah. Sean asked, this is funny. I was thinking, like, there's got to be an underlining, like, something that Trump is looking for. It could be, renegotiating. Maybe he really wants us at the 51st state. But is there something that we're missing here? Like, what is it that maybe Trump might be actually after that we don't see it? It's not in front of us. Any comments on that?
I think he really does. Not only is he going back to mercantilism, but he's also going back to colonization and imperial U.S. Like, he really truly does think he can purchase Greenland and the Panama Canal, and he wants Canada. Of course he wants Canada. Why wouldn't he? He'd have the aluminum problem solved. He'd have the steel problem solved. He'd have cheap hydroelectricity from Quebec. He'd have all the rare earth minerals. The U.S. would be a much stronger economy and a much, but nobody in Canada, I shouldn't say nobody, by far the majority of Canadians want no parts of it, and short of a war, it can't possibly happen. And it isn't going to be a war. between Canada and the United States, it's like a joke.
No, but doesn't that underline how powerful we can be as a country? Like, you think about everything you said there, like this is what the US wants, but yet we don't really do much with it, do we? Like, we can do so much more with our resources, so much more with what we have as a nation. And I don't know if it's government. Well, yes, it is government. Of course it's government, because government can, obviously push that mandate. But man, are we missing? And maybe this is the wake-up call. Maybe this is going to cause us to figure this out finally, that we can be a nation that can go out globally and really compete and, be on top of sort of the world. So this is going to be interesting how this all plays out, and I hope it does play out for the better. Okay, Jason Nugent. Hey, Jay, hope all's well. How realistic is it that we can diversify our economy away from the U.S. in semi-reasonably amount of time? So can Europe fill a lot of gaps for us? As other countries like South American countries, can they fill some gaps that the U.S. has? Is it possible?
Yeah, it would help. And eliminating provincial trade barriers would be helpful too. But it won't fill the entire difference. I mean, nobody's the United States. You'd have to add up a whole lot of countries. And we do have trade deals with the EU. We should look at those. We should be much closer to the EU than we are. But mind you, it's partly their issue as well. I mean, their intention is to trade with one another. Obviously, they have to trade beyond that. And we've had the advantage of being next door to the US. Some of the products we produce, like aluminum, steel, it's expensive to transport.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't want to have to go too far. But at the end of the day, I believe that the United States will recognize that there are just some things that they cannot produce domestically. And for that, they need friendly, helpful trading partners.
But can we spend a little bit of time? No, that makes sense. Can we spend a little bit of time on interprovincial trade? Because I thought, the whole idea of protectionism, that's exactly what interprovincial trade is. That's why there's barriers to protect, jobs and the people in those provinces. So we are sort of guilty of that. So you're talking about maybe, opening that up. So if we open up interprovincial trade, in your mind, Sherry, what is that going to do for Canada? Is it because there is certain, like Alberta obviously has certain resources that other provinces have, and then there's work and manufacturing here in Ontario. So is that the idea, to open that up and see more trade, more barriers down? Like, I guess there's fines if you do trade, those come down. I know I can't order BC wine, it's crazy, but that all, so it just opens it up. Okay, so the idea is there's going to be more opportunity for some individual provinces by going outside.
Right.
Okay. Am I missing anything?
No, but keeping in mind that we're 41 million and the US is 350 million, it's like, it's hard to replace us with trading with, I don't know, Quebec. Okay.
All right, your biggest fan, Carlos. Hey, Carlos, hope you're well. Can Canadians expect Bank of Canada to be more aggressive with their rate cuts during the rest of 2025? You had your chart there. Your predictions have been, I think you're 16 out of 17. So I'm just going to bet on those ones being right, unless there's some data or economic catastrophes that happen. So what are your thoughts? Bank of Montreal was saying if these tariffs continue, they're talking about going to 1.5% and perhaps 1% by the end of the year. Do you agree with that?
No.
No.
Prior to COVID, the overnight rate was 1.75%. And I'm thinking that could be the floor, because 1.75% was preceded by less than 2% inflation for the previous decade. And we have
okay. So I don't disagree with you, but we're way worse off right now. What could be coming than 2019 before pandemic is 1.75. So why couldn't it go lower?
Well, because it's not just about growth, it's about prices. And we've had an inflation scare, a big one.
Okay.
And we've done well. Our inflation's come down faster than other countries.
Okay.
And so we were the first to ease, and we've eased more aggressively than anyone, and for good reason, because we are so interest sensitive. But because we're so interest sensitive, and the last time they eased because of an emergency, they took rates down to a mere quarter point. Right. They may be reticent to do that this time. But fiscal policy we haven't talked about. There are plans afoot to help support people that lose their jobs. That's okay, and it makes it easier, and employment insurance will be a little easier to get, but that's not the answer. That's a temporary fix.
Okay, let's talk about consumer confidence. Sean Humphreys. Hey, Sean, second question. Make this your last. Just kidding. Ask as many as you want. So let's talk about consumer confidence. So we know that there's a lot of uncertainty. Uncertainty causes panic. Panic causes pause. Pause obviously is not good for the economy. But will the consumer get past this? If they do, is this a strong opportunity in your mind? Hesitation persists until there is more economic stability, of course, but there's opportunities out there. Right. Here's the thing, and you said this, I think, in the beginning or sometime during your presentation, that rates coming down is where people are gonna get more confident, right? Rates coming down is where people will invest, where people will borrow because it becomes cheaper. Is that enough? Or will the economy and inflation and tariffs and obviously job losses play more of a role in that consumer confidence?
I think there's enough pent-up demand for housing that people who have a down payment and have been looking but been on the sidelines, never pulled the trigger, first-time buyers will come in. They'll have real opportunities. There's a lot for sale, and a lot more that will be for sale. In the move-up market, it's more determined by family size and changes within your household. And if interest rates get low enough, people are going to take the plunge.
Yeah.
So it won't be everybody, and it certainly won't be the people who are unemployed. But we've seen in the past when interest rates fall a lot, like during COVID, people go and buy, even though, we had no idea how long that would last.
Yeah, the financial crisis is another good example. There was about a 6-month pause, and then once rates got to a certain level, it was like immediate that people came into the market, and we saw a lot of activity. I'm gonna go to Patrick Tremblay. Hey, Patrick. In the work of Doge, you knew Elon Musk was coming eventually, to increase productivity numbers to offset the inflationary impact of tariffs. Is that what it's doing? Is that what Doge is doing?
No, they want to. They call the U.S. federal employee bureaucracy the deep state. I worked for the federal government in the United States. I was at the Federal Reserve Board. I was at Fannie Mae. I can tell you that people who work for the federal government are not slackers. That's not, I never worked so hard in my life. Nights, weekends, it was crazy. And just to come in and to say, whoever wants to quit, I'll give you $25,000, leave, is the worst way to rationalize a labor force. And what they're doing is they want to defang all of the regulatory bodies. That includes the Environmental Protection Agency, which they would love to shut down. They're going to do their best to do it. That includes certainly look at health and human resources and the measles scare and all of that. And on top of that, we've got so many different jobs that the federal government employees do. If the minute we see a delay in Social Security checks or Medicare or Medicaid checks, there's going to be a hue and cry like you would never believe. And so I think it's only a matter of time before, cutting the way they've cut, they find there are enormous unintended consequences.
Yeah, and it's probably some to do with the tax that you talked about as well. Like, what better way to save on spending than get rid of government jobs, right? So interesting. Right. Okay, we're gonna go to Nancy Ingram. Hey, Nancy, how long do you see it taking to break down the interprovincial borders, and will it be enough to help us in the short term? So is that an instant thing? They can just come out, and does everybody have to agree?
No. Like, I moved to Canada 40 years ago, and they were talking about it then. And we've been talking about it it's not going to happen. I really don't think so.
Oh, wait. It's not going to happen, or it's going to take a long time to happen?
It'll be begrudging, and because it would take 10 different governments to make a decision, and it's a good idea, and if it encourages it and it does happen, that helps, but it only just at the margin.
Okay. Paula Hutton. Hey, Paula. Regarding USA, can Canada retaliate in any effective way? I feel we are a flea on the butt of an elephant. It's funny, you had that one chart which showed the dark blue line, the light blue line, and I didn't even realize. I mean, I think Paula's kind of right. They're not going to be like, if we do have tariffs, and I know that our premier in Ontario is trying his hardest to retaliate, but man, I don't think it's going to work, is it?
Well, I mean, he had to take. He didn't have to, but a 50% tariff on aluminum would be really awful. But you know, I mean, it's true. The United States has been the leader of the free world, but Donald Trump is doing everything he can to change that, and so the U.S.'s power may well diminish.
Monique, how are you doing? And Sherry, thanks as always. What is the holy grail to eliminate the tariff war? Is it really to increase border control and fentanyl? Not a chance. Or is this a Trump tactic? Yeah. What is there one thing, like if we say, okay, we're going to do this, what would it be besides the 51st state? What would it be in your mind that would help ease the tariffs?
Oh, I think he's going to keep the tariffs until he thinks he's gotten what he wants.
Which is
more production domestically.
Okay, but we talked about, like, you can't snap your fingers and have that. So just the promises, like if these manufacturers or businesses say, yeah, we'll build factories, we'll build our stuff there, and he sees that, he'll go, okay, I'll ease off the tariffs.
Well, he'll have to be proven. It will have to be proven that he's been wrong. It didn't do what he thought it would do. And that takes a long time. And so, like, he changes his mind on a dime. And so how do you function in that environment?
Is there any level of government that can push back or no? Like, is there a level of government that can?
No. And the courts are working on trying to prevent him from impounding funds that have been approved by Congress. And the systems of checks and balances is intended to separate the judicial system from the executive.
Right.
Okay, so the Congress created USAID and funded it, And then Trump said, oh, well, never mind. We're going to shut it down. He goes and fires everybody. The Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. And then the question becomes, does Trump comply with a court order? And we haven't tested that yet.
Oh boy. Okay. Jim's Claus asks, should there not be an incentive to create more productivity within our country?
Well, sure there should. But a lot of the problems with productivity has to do with interprovincial trade barriers, a very large land mass with very few people, and therefore insufficient economies of scale. And where we do best are things like aluminum and energy, that because of our natural endowments. And for aluminum, the real endowment is all that hydroelectric power in Quebec. And the US doesn't have that. And they're not going to get it without making us their 51st state. But they're not going to get it. And you can't change that. And that's why, of course, countries should produce what they're best at producing and then sell their surplus to other countries.
I want to skip down to Nancy just asked this question. I've been sort of curious about this too, because I've been hearing stuff like he's going to change the Constitution so he can get a third term, or have some sort of succession plan that he can force of one of his sons. Is that possible?
Anything's possible with him. Anything. And for sure, the reason he's letting the stock market crash the way it is because he doesn't think he's ever going to have to go up before another election. So, and he would love to be president for life. So I have no doubt that there'll be some machinations where he attempts it. Do I know whether the U.S. Constitution will be sufficient to stop him? I don't know.
So Mark, just on sort of dovetail on that, is he doing it so the Fed lowers rates? I don't think there's a correlation between markets crashing and moving rates.
There is in terms of psychology, and there is in terms of, I mean, look what happened with the financial crisis. I mean, if you start to see huge losses, then there's a domino effect.
So how many people in Congress shorted the market before this all tariff happened? You know?
No, I don't. And let's hope that, I mean, wouldn't that be awful?
Yeah.
And maybe Trump shorted the market. We don't know a thing about what he does with his money.
So on our federal election, just really quickly, and we've got a few more questions. We're going to get to them, guys. Just be patient. Thank you. This has been great. And Sherry, you got a little bit more time? You're good?
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the federal election, so we have Carney is now the new leader and sort of pseudo prime minister. He's going to probably call an election, I think, soon, or is it going to go to the fall? I don't know. Like, how much of that is going to play a part in all of this? Is there someone that can go up against Trump, either Poilievre or Carney, or someone that's going to make a difference, or is it going to make no difference?
I think it makes a difference. How you handle this, I mean, people who can play Trump do a lot better. I don't know what Justin Trudeau's did to alienate Trump so much, probably just by being himself in the sense. Yeah, exactly. You know, it's like Trump's.
Well, it's right, 'cause he did say that he respected Ford for doing what he did, and then I think he's on the way to Washington today or something. So you're right, there is a way to play him. So is it Poilievre or Carney? Now we have to be very careful with this answer, and I guess all you can do is give your opinion. But will it be Poilievre or Carney that's going to play him the best in your mind?
That I don't know. I think you know what worries me about Poilievre is that he doesn't have good relationships with the business community or with Bay Street. Even though the business community in Bay Street may well be conservative, he has never kind of nurture those relationships. And the other thing that Carney has is that Europe knows Carney very well.
Yeah.
So, whereas Polyev is an unknown on a global basis.
All right, we got a few more, Sherry, a few more minutes. Monique is asking about the Canadians now wanting to stop supporting the U.S. economy. Really interesting. They showed a picture of the border and then also at the airport for going through to customs, and it was dead. And you talked about $15 billion that we spend in U.S. every year. That's going to have an effect for sure.
Yeah, it does. Although you're talking about $1 trillion economy, it's a small number, but no, they're Canadians in every respect. America benefits from Canada in every respect, so it just makes no sense.
Okay, so three more questions. So Carlos, expect the Canadian economy to be seriously affected amidst the pressure of the U.S. will be just a slight effect. In your opinion, is Canadian economy strong enough to go beyond external pressure? So do we have what it takes to make this soft or as soft as possible, or are we going to suffer?
We're going to suffer, but it's not the end of the world. I think Trump is going to get in trouble politically for this. Like, people aren't going to like it when they finally see what the effect is. They're not going to like it, and so that'll cause him to temper it. And maybe we'll get rid of the tariffs relatively soon. I don't know.
Okay, and then Rob's asked, the fall in GDP started 5 quarters ago. Is that because of Trump? 5 quarters ago that he wasn't.
No.
Okay. This is a good last one from Peter Paley, my pal. Hope you're doing well, Peter. Looking forward to seeing you in Mexico next month. What advice should we be giving our clients as brokers? I've been trying to urge people to refinance, pay out debt, consolidate and accessibility of their equity on lines of credits to prepare them for a lengthy trade war. Is that the advice you're giving? Hey, get ready. And in order to get ready, you have to have your finances in order. To get your finances in order, talk to a broker. Let's see where you're at, where you need to be, and we can help you do that. Would you agree with that?
Yes, but don't time markets. Don't sell your portfolio.
No.
I mean, you can't time it. None of us know what's going to happen tonight, let alone in the next 6 months. So I think that I think that people shouldn't panic and won't panic. But the fact that this is going on and it's affecting every country and it's very unpopular, I think that will help to shorten the whole process.
Yeah, and listen, I agree with Peter. Like, this is a good time to have at least the conversations, right? You're in a situation, no matter what, borrowing is important for all of us as Canadians. So where do you want to be? Where are you at today? And to have that advice is so important. So contacting your local mortgage broker has never been more pressing. And you can do that simply by visiting dominionlending.ca and connecting with one of our mortgage professionals that can help you navigate these challenging times. And listen, I believe there's tons of opportunity. I believe that when you're going through something like this, we saw it in COVID, we saw it in the financial crisis. This is no different. It's not like this is like something that's going to be, way different than what we've experienced in the past. I really believe there is ways through this. Having those conversations are important, making sure that that professional is on your side, and we can do that for you. I just want to thank FCT again for sponsoring. Thanks everyone for hanging on for 20 minutes past our hour. I know how important this was, so I wanted to do that. Sherry, of course, thank you so much for always giving your incredible insights. And we look forward to seeing maybe we look forward, but I think, we're anxious to see what's going to happen going from here. I think our next, April 16th. So, just over a month from now, I think you're right, Sherry, we'll see another 0.25%. And hang in there, guys. If there's anything we can do at all, please reach out. You can reach out to Sherry directly. She's always open. Obviously, you can reach out to me, Eddy@dlc.ca. And of course, any one of our mortgage professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care. Be safe. Bye-bye.